It's a Pan-African mechanism which has been endorsed by the African Union as a mechanism that should be implemented in all African elections. I have participated in 3 of the women's situation rooms. I was in the one in Sierra Leone in November 2012. I was in the Kenya Women's Situation Room in March 2013, and then the Uganda one in 2016, February.
The assessment mission was the first intervention after women's organizations in Uganda had an interaction with the Angie Brooks Centre, the establishment agency for the Women's Situation Room. And the assessment mission was intended to help us confirm if women of Uganda felt the need to replicate a women's situation room, if there was fear of violence during election, because that's the core of the women's situation room. It also helped us to understand what was the nature of the violence and what were the causal factors for this violence during election, so that when we come and we set up the situation room, we are able to look at those issues. But also, the peer-to-peer peace process would look at those particular causal factors as the key elements to start speaking about and to encourage people to avoid during the electoral period and during the time when we are conducting the election itself. The assessment mission had a series of meetings with various key actors around elections. We of course met with the Electoral Commission, the full commission, the commissioners, the EC. Then we also met with the media. After the assessment mission, we were able to confirm that the violence was real, was anticipated. There was so much fear among the citizens.
The partnership was between the Forum for Women in Development, FORWARD, Institute for Social Transformation, IST, and ISIS Wiki. In all the stages of the Women's Situation Room, these 3 conveners were able to work together in terms of decision making, deciding on the different stages and the adoption of the International Women's Situation Room to the context of Uganda.
And the Institute for Social Transformation was a convener of the Women's Situation Room together with FORWARD and ISIS Wiki. And as the executive director for the institute, I was at the center of the process for the Women's Situation Room in Uganda, from the assessment to the observation to the physical room and the post-election programming.
With the help of the Women's Situation Room assessment mission, we are able to identify students from Makerere University, from the institutions of learning universities, especially Makerere, Chambogo, that are notorious for strikes and conflict, and then got the border riders, that's the motorcycle riders, the gangmen, and also engaged the youth from Kampala that are unemployed. But we also had to look at the 15 hotspot districts that were selected by the various organizations and select these specific youth that we believe that would be of havoc in their regions. We took them through the process of peer-to-peer communication skills, electoral laws and offences per the Constitution of Uganda, and also guided them on what they needed to do during the electoral process to avoid being caught up in conflict. But we also taught them how to resolve conflict between themselves without engaging in violence.
The eminent women in this regard of the Situation Room are women of caliber, women of integrity, women who have high profile, women with connections, and women who have the power to pick a phone call and are able to call a very important person who could turn around the situation. So as we were doing work in the Women's Situation Room, our main aim was to make sure that Uganda has peaceful elections, that we prevent violence, that we make sure that the election organizing goes as planned and very well, so that we prevent any thing that could incite the population to go into violence. So we did a robust process of selecting the eminent women who would come to Uganda to be in the room. And many would be Ugandan women, and others we solicited them from the African continent. So what we did is we sat down a number of times and you put across names from West Africa, from East Africa, from Southern Africa. So we went nominating different people and we would sit and thieve. And this process involved Ugandan women who have worked at international level. It involved UN women in Uganda and all the entire civil society. At first we had over 25 names on the list, and then we started to vet. One of the key things was, what power do you hold that you could pick a phone call and call the president of Uganda? Do you know him anyway? And then we also looking at people who understand and are able to negotiate and influence political decisions. We wanted people who have kind of rubbed shoulders and understand how politics works. And very importantly, we wanted to get women who are perceived not to have any political inclination. The perceived is very, very important. We are all political beings. It's very difficult to find somebody who is not political. But what we are looking for is, how do Ugandans view you? Are you pro-government? Are you opposition? Or they think you have a neutral role in the middle, that you are not highly involved with the ruling government in Uganda, you are not on the opposition, and they feel they can trust you, that if you were deciding on their behalf, you are not going to fall on either side.
We had 10 Ugandan eminent women who were chosen to be part of the women's situation, the first women's situation room in Uganda. All of them were women who were perceived to have a neutral role or seemed non-partisan, and there were also people from different walks of life, so that we could represent perhaps the whole range of Ugandan women. We were also joined by 5 international women who also trained us and helped us listen and hear what we are looking for, especially early warning signs, so that we could be part of the solution.
As we launch the physical room of the Women's Situation Room, I bring you greetings from Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of the Republic of Liberia, and the only woman elected on the continent of Africa as president. She is also the champion of the Women's Situation Room. The Women's Situation Room started in Liberia during the 2011 presidential and legislative elections, when the women of Liberia saw us escalating towards violence and decided it was unacceptable, especially after our civil war. The women, led by Angie Brooks International Centre for Women's Empowerment, Leadership Development, International Peace and Security, decided to embrace the youth who were the perpetrators of violence. The youth were taught how to be peace ambassadors and how to engage into peer-to-peer peace advocacy. They were also taught to be observers and learn the Liberian Constitution and provisions for elections and the elections law of Liberia, so that they knew the extent of the various stakeholders' authority during elections. After the successful implementation of the Women's Situation Room in Liberia, we took it to the General Is My Agenda campaign at the African Union. It was found as a best practice and we were asked to replicate it throughout Africa. Also at that meeting, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was asked and agreed to become the champion of the room, which gave it the highest diplomacy you can find. So the Situation Room is under her championship, which brings into the room a level of diplomacy not found anywhere else. Another distinguishing factor about the Women's Situation Room is the fact that we are not just election observers. We are conflict resolutionists. We resolve conflict in real time, and we do it as we go along. That is what happens. We don't wait and just file reports and put them down. We actually resolve the conflicts as they come into the room. We also engage, very importantly, the Elections Commission and security forces. We have been pleased that as we replicated the Situation Room under the mandate of the African Union, we have been able to replicate it in Senegal, in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, in Nigeria, and we're now in Uganda and going on to Ghana.
There are a few thoughts that I personally would like to share as I have been closely following the run-up to our elections. Conflict and tension during elections have become all too common in Africa's new and young democracies, and I consider Uganda a very new and young democracy for many reasons that I will not go into. So, because Uganda has had its own share of political conflict in the past, none of us should ever be complacent in ensuring that the election violence we hear about or read about happening in sister countries does not happen here in our own country. In this regard, every Ugandan has an important part to play in ensuring the stability and security of our country and our people, and ensuring that this is not jeopardized. It's often been said that women sit back usually and leave the politics to the men, but when conflict breaks out, we bear the brunt. We shall no longer be the silent. We may be victims, but we shall not be silent victims anymore. The Women's Situation Room, starting its work today, will be a roving eye throughout the districts of Uganda. In addition, of course, to the efforts of the observers and so on. And if you think that we are a force to be ignored, you have another thing coming. We will not be ignored. And if we say this is what we saw and this is what we heard, and we tried to resolve this conflict to no end, we will name individuals. Please, we are not joking this time round. We will not joke. I would also like to emphasize the non-political nature of the Women's Situation Room. You may notice, maybe some of us have played certain parts in the past, but as of today, our membership in the Women's Situation Room is very carefully chosen based on our non-political affiliations. Of course, we're all going to vote, and we have the parties that we support. But in this role that we are playing, we are here as neutral players. So we will welcome reports of incidents from all political parties and from anybody that does not support any political party, but who's concerned about a situation that's about to erupt into violence.
But this unique role that we had in the Women's Situation Room, which was different from the other observer room, is that we were not only observing the elections, but our major role was to ensure that we mitigate conflict and ensure that conflict does not arise during the election, or if it does, try our level best to see that action is taken to ensure that that conflict is addressed immediately. And so, unlike other rooms, observer missions, we had the police, a desk for the police, we had a desk for the youth, we had a desk for the UPDF, and we also had a desk for the Electoral Commission, which unfortunately wasn't manned in the room, but nevertheless, we did have contacts of the Electoral Commission officials in the field. So having these desks in the room enabled us to have, contact with these people who are actually engaged in the conflicts that we're talking about.
Our role during the physical space during the election was to manage the call center. The call center of the Women's Situation Room is a communication hub that hosted the phone calls and the majority of the technical support to the situation room. So we had the call center. With regards to the call center, we partnered with Airtel Uganda that provided us with a free toll call. And then we also set up the phones at the center, working with youth who volunteered during the period to work on shift basis for 24 hours. In the situation room, we also had the political analyst, the legal analyst, the youth desk, the police desk, and the army desk. All the calls come into the center. It is recorded. It is recorded in the computer system. It is recorded on hard copy on papers. And then, being the managers of the call center, we pick up these papers to the Eminent Women. The Eminent Women assess these papers, either refer it to the police or the army, the political analyst or the legal analyst. However, all the calls that come in and recorded are given to the political analyst and they copy to the legal analyst. We give them all these calls with the complaints that are coming in for them to do an analysis and be able to advise on how best they could be handled, but also to have a record of what was happening during the elections, and for them to be able to advise the Eminent Women strategically in terms of decisions they could take pertaining to the challenges that we have found during the elections.
Our role as Eminent Women was to be the final voice of issues that were arising within the situation room. Our job is to monitor the elections, to ensure that we have peace, to identify areas where there might be conflict or there might be disagreements, just in order to ensure that we can maintain peace throughout the elections. So as Eminent Women, we were sitting in the situation room at the Sheraton Hotel and partnering with the youth. We had youth representatives, and the youth were in the room receiving the issues that were being raised at the various polling stations. We were responding to those issues. We had also with us the police, we had the Electoral Commission, and we had the army on top of us as Eminent Women. And I think the role of the Eminent Women is their contacts, their influence in the community. At any point when an issue came up, the women, one of them would know the right person to call, and this person would be able to respond to some of the issues.
The Institute for Social Transformation, we were privileged to be the organization in charge of the physical room for the Eminent Women. This was a room big enough to accommodate all those numbers of women, but also the visitors. And also in the room, we had a program that we followed. We had the political analyst, we had the youth analyst for youth involvement, and the media. So when the room, of course, the first day we did a launch of the room. We had the peace cross, a very big peace cross where people would append their signatures and messages of what they are telling Ugandans or what Ugandans would want to see themselves. People started signing on the peace cross. Persons with disabilities were present in the room, the youth. I think we had a few children, and of course civil society. We had people from the political scene coming in the room to really see. And I think Ugandans were anxiously waiting, what is that room? So every morning we would have brief from the three people, the political analyst, the media, and the youth analyst, to be able to tell us how have they been following events of the situation before the election day. And we would try to see, are there any signs of violence? Is there anything that the women would be able to do?
And what the police did, the ones who were within the situation room, was to call their counterparts in the areas that these complaints were coming from. And what they were requesting for were their counterparts to verify if actually those incidents were taking place, and after verifying, to make sure that they intervene to prevent any chaos that would have erupted. The mandate of the women in the Women's Situation Room was to ensure that there was peace before, during, and after elections. So we worked with the police to make sure that the issues that came in through the call center of the Women's Situation Room that had a bearing on peace and security were channeled to the police desk. So they would come to us as the Eminent Women, and we vet or look at them and judge if this incident requires army, police, or electoral commission, or the LCs of the area. So once we found that it was for police, then we referred it to the police desk. The police desk was, before it came, our team had to go and interface with the leadership of the police in the country, that is the IGP and his team, and they promised to send us ladies, senior police ladies, and they did so. They sent 3 senior police ladies, and the ladies they sent, 2 of them were from the family and child protection unit of the police. So they were very relevant to our situation. And then the 3rd one was from the section of the police, which is to do with crime prevention.
I think the greatest part of the room was our partnership with the young people, the youth, who had ears on the ground, who understood where the tensions were coming from, and who are often used to take advantage of situations that were volatile. And so it was really lovely to be part of this room. The youth had a call-in center. There was a call-in number, a toll-free call-in number, which was advertised nationwide. And it was very interesting to hear on the ground the sort of concerns and things that were happening, especially in the hot spot areas that came into the room. The youth would take these down, noting the concerns of the citizens, and they were then brought into the room. And after listening to the problem, the concern, we were assigned to find solutions to these challenges that people were facing out there.
We advertised the free toll call, so people used to call us and tell us, especially on the day of the election. Most of the things that happened was around Kampala. They were calling about why the elections have not taken place. There were people in the polling stations as early as 7 o'clock. Some came at night even, and some spent the night there. And the young people came in droves to vote this time. But there was no there were no people from the Electoral Commission. In my own polling station, I went there around 10 o'clock. The polling materials had not arrived. So they arrived around 12. So people were agitated a bit. But then we had the calls from people complaining mostly about this. Then we had the calls about people who alleged that there were stuffed ballot papers, boxes in a particular place in the western region. Then in Mbarara, we had also calls from voters saying that when the election material arrived, it was supposed to arrive in the presence of all the parties who are taking part in the elections. But some alleged that they were kept away, and only one party was allowed to witness the arrival of the ballot papers and the ballot materials, and that they were given books ballot books and they came out with it. That's what they did. So we also rang there, but there was no response.
The process of sorting out what was happening, it was really great that the army had agreed to be part of our situation room, that they actually stationed somebody there, so much so that in the few cases where the complaints were about the army, we relayed them immediately. And actually, the head of the army commander, had given us his contact, saying, should things get out of hand and we feel like we have to contact him, he was available.
I think the greatest part of the room was our partnership with the young people, the youth, who had ears on the ground, who understood where the tensions were coming from, and who are often used to take advantage of situations that were volatile. And so it was really lovely to be part of this room. The youth had a call-in center. There was a call-in number, a toll-free call-in number, which was advertised nationwide. And it was very interesting to hear on the ground the sort of concerns and things that were happening, especially in the hot spot areas that came into the room. The youth would take these down, noting the concerns of the citizens, and they were then brought into the room. And after listening to the problem, the concern, we were assigned to find solutions to these challenges that people were facing out there.
The other component that the Eminent Women did is they went out to observe elections on the election day. We spread them out in the different areas of Kampala and the outskirts to go and really observe so that they can link the calls they were receiving to what was actually happening on the ground. And when they did, a lot of interesting things happened. They were able to see how some of the materials delayed. They were able to see the long lines of waiting, involving the elderly, involving, pregnant women, and how really certain things were not catered for to enable people vote right in time. And they were also able to avert some of the incidences. I remember one area, I think, where Honorable Secretary was. And imagine, the returning officer got an accident as they were coming to the station. And people were wondering what is happening. They were not starting. So they were able to make a few calls, and a replacement was quickly sent in.
I recall one that was in the area of Bukoma Simbin Massacre area, where a lady called and reported that the daughter was supporting a different candidate and she was supporting a different candidate. So there were crime preventers. There were people trained as crime preventers, and they were trying to harm her, the mom, because the daughter was now with the crime preventers. So when they called the women's situation room, I took it up, and I found that the area was for Honorable Namayanja, and I made sure that I looked up her telephone and requested that they liaise with the police to make sure that we have double effort from the police and from Madame Namayanja, who was the MP for that area, to make sure that the family does not fall apart because of elections. And at the end of the day, we were able to get this sorted. The police that side worked with Honorable Namayanja, and they were able to ensure harmony in this family. So that is just one of them, because you would see a parent and a child having differences because of supporting different candidates, and then it erupts into violence.
People called in. There was an incident from Western Uganda in Kabale, where they were almost setting people ablaze in the house because they perceived that they had ballot papers hidden in there. And this was really a prominent family. And the women swung into action. They spoke, they managed to get the numbers of the people who were being held hostage. They were being surrounded by a mob of people, got into contact with security, and selected a few representatives who went in to search the house. And guess what? They had nothing. But if they had not come, who would know? That could have been a source of violence for the whole region.
What was very interesting about the call center for me was the multiple layers of activities that was going on at the same time. So for example, we had calls coming, we had interactions, move to the police, go to the Eminent Women, come back. And then we set for ourselves a target to say that any call that comes in that requires a response, it shouldn't take us more than 5 minutes to resolve it. And because the police was seated in the room and the army, it was then easy for us to get these issues, and they will call immediately the site, and they were able to resolve this. So we kept looking at the speed at which we were able to resolve the call. So that was very interesting and unique for us. We received about 1,514 calls during the period, and the calls were all coming from different parts of Uganda. And it wasn't really so much like concentrated in the 15 districts where we had trained women, and youths. The reason is that during the period, we were able to share this toll-free number using the newspaper and radio to spread the word about the call center. But also because a lot of people were so desperate in terms of getting information about the elections. The highest percentage of calls we received, like about 34%, were related to election issues about voting materials not arriving, people not finding their names on the list, and some of those technical issues around the elections. So basically, that also gave us an idea of how to judge how the Electoral Commission itself was ready for the elections, but also how people, managed to vote during the period.
We are committed, and we want to assure the public that we shall do whatever is in our capacity to ensure that there is a peaceful, free and fair election. However, it is not enough, our efforts are not enough. We depend on each and every one of you to be vigilant and also be committed to peace and peaceful elections in our country. As we head towards the final phase of the campaigns and into the elections, I want to urge all of you to work with us, work with the Women's Situation Room, and report whatever incidents that you see, so that we can respond and ensure that people go about the exercise, especially on voting day, without any intimidation or fear. And I also want to really caution whoever is out there intimidating people not to go to vote. Please, you stop it. It's the right of every Ugandan to exercise their vote for whoever they want to govern this country.
Just the fact that we were able to be part of the process, we were there listening to what was going on, watching what was going on, answering all those telephone calls, because we got over 1,000 telephone calls when we were in the situation room, and being able to handle issues that arose in real time, and being able to sustain our neutrality so that we listen to everybody, irrespective of who you were, from what part of the country, I think made it worthwhile.
The room also had a component where we were receiving visitors, but also where the eminent women went out to be able to influence. In terms of the visitors who came to the room, mainly they were leaders from political parties of Uganda. Then we also had head of missions like the EU rather. Then we also had head of missions like the African Union, the Commonwealth. Then we had embassies and foreign missions. They also visited the room. And many of those that I could, highlight: the Belgian embassy, the ambassador was there, the US embassy, the Swedish were there. And then we also had other observers, like the Ugandan Sion observers. They also visited the room. But we also had individual people who came. I remember a person with a disability coming in the room, to be able to talk to the women and highlight their issues when it comes to elections as persons with disabilities.
In the first initiative that we agreed upon, where we agreed to pursue peace after the elections, based on the immediate response to the results, to the disputed results, and also issues that we know as Ugandans have been issues that have surfaced at the end of every election for the last 4 elections. We reached out to the 2 main political parties, the National Resistance Movement, the NRM party, led by the president, which is in government, led by President Yoweri Museveni as the principal of the party, and also the main opposition party, FDC, led by Kano Kiza Besije. We reached out to both. They were both very welcoming to the Eminent Women. We engaged each one of them several times on these issues, and our message was for each of them to play the role as leaders to ensure that our country continues in peace. They were both very anxious to make sure that that happens. We also found them very welcoming of the idea of having a dialogue in the country of political parties so that we can address these issues that Uganda finds itself with around elections. The Eminent Women of the Women's Situation Room have continued to carry out mediation and negotiations, working towards this political dialogue.
And I think the next time we can reach areas that we believe are not hotspots. We'll do all the districts in Uganda, because you never know where it's going to come from. But from districts that we worked with and from reports that are shown, we were able to curb the violence because it was a choice made by the youth. You give them the platform to be responsible and to take up the leadership that they are meant to take on issues that affect them, especially during elections.
The process of sorting out what was happening, it was really great that the army had agreed to be part of our situation room, that they actually stationed somebody there, so much so that in the few cases where the complaints were about the army, we relayed them immediately. And actually, the head of the army commander, had given us his contact, saying, should things get out of hand and we feel like we have to contact him, he was available.
With the purpose that the Women's Situation Room was set out to achieve, we really did achieve. For example, the peace messages really sank. And these peace messages came in a very special way, that we used the voices of these prominent women who people look up to. They went on TV and they were telling people, let us keep peace. It sank very well, and people were able to know that they are Ugandans who yearn for peace like them. And the other impact was also that they provided a platform for people to be able to air their concerns and know that my issues have been taken care of and they will be dealt with. You imagine over 1,400 calls that were received. If that platform was not there, what could have happened? With the purpose that the Women's Situation Room was set out to achieve, we really did achieve. For example, the peace messages really sank. And these peace messages came in a very special way, that we used the voices of these prominent women who people look up to. They went on TV and they were telling people, let us keep peace. It sank very well, and people were able to know that they are Ugandans who yearn for peace like them. And the other impact was also that they provided a platform for people to be able to air their concerns and know that my issues have been taken care of and they will be dealt with. You imagine over 1,400 calls that were received. if that platform was not there, what could have happened? It has provided a platform to know that Ugandans can be able to contribute to the peace process of their own country. Of course, as you know, after the elections, the post-election period, the women are still working up to date, trying to see when the president, one of the presidential candidates, was not being allowed to move, was held hostage, was in prison. Their voices have kept with Ugandans, telling them, don't turn to violence, let's sort this peacefully. And as you're aware, we are all hoping and waiting that the national dialogue will possibly take place, and part of the credit, I think the Eminent Women have worked towards that.
It gave people an avenue of complaints, and we responded to them, and I think they were grateful. It helped us to participate in the election by trying to prevent violence.
Part of, I think, the great secret is confidentiality and creating trust in the parties concerned, that we could hold information for the good of the nation without sort of having a selfish end in terms of publicizing before it was time to, at the right time. For me, actually, what I'm trying to say now is timing is so important. If you are impatient in the women's situation room, you'll not be able to achieve that which you came for. You could easily give up. You might not fully understand a situation, or you may not have the whole picture. And so with the group, the diverse group, for me it was important that we kept reminding ourselves, this isn't the whole story, this isn't the whole picture. We need to listen more, we need to engage more, and we mustn't give up on the processes of bringing about peace.
And I think that the fact that the women of Uganda, through the Women's Situation Room, have been at the forefront of pursuing peace after elections, and have been recognized and acknowledged by the two main political parties with whom we continue to engage and with whom we continue to engage, and who have consistently and repeatedly confirmed that this process that we are working with them on is the process that they want to pursue to lead to a dialogue in the country. I think that that's a major achievement.